The morning I turned 18, I already knew my family was planning to steal from me. What I didn't know yet was how much they were willing to destroy to do it. My name is Avalon Prescott, and I grew up in a glass house. Literally. Our home in Pacific Heights, San Francisco, was a 4-story architectural masterpiece my grandfather built in 1987. All floor-to-ceiling windows and cold Italian marble and the kind of silence that costs 7 figures to maintain. From the outside, we looked like a family out of a magazine spread. My father, Randall Prescott, was a venture capitalist whose name appeared in Forbes 3 years running. My mother, Diane, chaired 3 nonprofit boards and had never once cooked her own breakfast. My younger sister Sloane, 16 and already calculating, had learned early that beauty was currency and vulnerability was strategy. And me? I was the quiet one, the reader. The girl who sat in the corner of every dinner party and watched people the way scientists watch. Specimens. My grandparents on my mother's side, Nana Cecile and Pop Roland Voss, had built a real estate empire across Northern California. Not flashy, not loud, just steady, compounding generational wealth the old-fashioned way. And every Thanksgiving for as long as I could remember, Pop Roland would pull me aside, away from the noise and the wine and Randall's bragging, and he'd say the same thing. Avalon, money is patient. People aren't. Remember that. He died 11 months before my 18th birthday. Nana Cecile followed 6 weeks later. The coroner said, broken heart syndrome. I believed it completely, and that's when everything in my house changed overnight. Like someone flipped a switch. My parents had always been comfortable. But comfortable and wealthy are 2 entirely different zip codes. And the moment the estate lawyers confirmed that Nana Cecile and Pop Roland had left the majority of their holdings a trust valued at roughly $14 million to me, the temperature inside our glass house dropped by about 20 degrees. I noticed it first in the way my mother looked at me across the breakfast table. Not with love, with arithmetic. I was smart enough not to show that I noticed. That's the thing about being the quiet one. People forget you're paying attention. 3 weeks before my birthday, I overheard a phone call I wasn't supposed to hear. I'd come home early from school, taken my shoes off at the door the way I always did. And I was halfway up the floating staircase when my father's voice stopped me cold. He was in his office with the door cracked, speaking in that low, careful register he used when he thought no one was listening. She won't fight it, Diane. She's 18. She trusts us. We just need to get our names on the trust documents before she lawyers up. All of it, not half. All of it. I sat down on that staircase step and didn't move for 4 minutes. Then I called my grandparents' estate attorney, a woman named Patricia Okafor, from the bathroom with the shower running. What Patricia told me in that 15-minute phone call rearranged everything I thought I knew about my own family. Turns out my parents had already contacted Patricia twice. They'd suggested, politely, with all the right legal language, that as Avalon's guardians and financial co-signatories, they should be named co-trustees with full management authority until I turned 25. Patricia had declined both times. She was sharp, she was loyal to my grandparents' wishes, and she had kept every email. More importantly, she told me that under California law, I could execute an irrevocable transfer of the trust assets into a properly structured independent trust before my birthday, effectively removing any window for a legal challenge. I had 3 weeks. She could have it done in 2. I told her to do it. I said nothing to my parents. I smiled at dinner that night like I had no idea what was coming. And honestly, that smile was the best performance of my life. My 18th birthday fell on a Saturday in October, and my parents threw me a party that cost more than most people's annual salary. 90 guests, a rooftop venue in the financial district, flower walls, and a live jazz quartet, and a custom cake that had my name spelled out in gold leaf. My mother wore a cream Valentino gown and floated through the room, touching arms and laughing her practiced laugh. And my father gave a toast that was so warm and so perfectly crafted That 3 women I didn't. No, cried actual tears. I stood next to him and raised my glass and thought about the document I'd signed. 3 days earlier in Patricia's downtown office, the $14 million trust was already mine, independently, irrevocably, and entirely beyond my parents' reach. The party was beautiful, but it was built on a lie they didn't know I'd already buried. The next morning was a Sunday. I came downstairs around 9 and found my parents already seated at the kitchen island, both dressed, both holding coffee, both wearing the particular expression that meant they'd rehearsed this conversation. My sister Sloane was there too, which was unusual. She was never awake before noon on weekends. She sat at the far end of the island, picking at a bowl of fruit, not looking at me, which told me she knew exactly what was about to happen. My father spoke first. His voice was warm, measured, paternal. He said the family had been talking and given everything the Voss estate represented to all of them. Given Pop Roland's legacy and what the family stood for, it made the most sense for the assets to be managed collectively. He slid a document across the counter toward me, thick, professionally bound. My name was on the cover. I picked it up. I paged through it slowly. It was a co-trust agreement naming my parents as primary trustees with full discretionary authority over distributions until I turned 25. Buried on page 11 was a clause that allowed them to draw management fees of up to 40% annually, 40%, on $14 million. Over 7 years, my mother reached across and touched my hand. It's really the best thing for everyone, baby. You don't want the stress of managing all of that at your age. We're just trying to protect you. That word, protect, landed in my chest like a stone. I looked at my sister. She was still staring at her fruit, but her jaw was tight. I looked at my father. He had his courtroom smile on, the one that said, "This is already decided. We're just waiting for your signature." I looked at my mother and thought about all the times she'd called me her favorite, her brightest, her most special girl, and wondered exactly when she'd decided I was worth more as a resource than as a daughter. I set the document down. I said, very quietly, that I needed to use the restroom and I'd be right back. I went upstairs. I sat on the edge of my bed. I opened my phone and texted Patricia. They made their move exactly as we expected. She responded in under a minute. Documented. Standing by, I washed my face. I straightened my hair. I went back downstairs. Here's the thing nobody tells you about being betrayed by people who love you. The hardest part isn't the anger. It's staying calm enough to finish what you started. I sat back down at the kitchen island. I looked at the document. I looked at my parents. And then I said, very pleasantly, that I'd already spoken with Patricia Okafor. That the Voss Trust had been restructured and transferred into an independent trust 3 days before my birthday. That there was nothing left to co-manage, and that if they had questions, they were welcome to contact Patricia directly. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard. My father's coffee cup clinked against the marble. My mother's face went through about 6 different emotions in 4 seconds. Sloane looked up from her fruit bowl for the first time all morning, and I caught something in her expression that I couldn't quite read. It wasn't shock, exactly. It was something more complicated. My father recovered first. His voice dropped out of warm and into cold so fast it was almost impressive. He said I didn't understand what I'd done. He said I was a child making adult mistakes with family money. He said Pop Roland would be ashamed. That one was designed to hurt, and it almost worked. Almost. I stood up, I pulled my cardigan tighter, and I said, as calmly as I could, that Pop Roland was the one who had called me 3 months before he died. To tell me that my parents had already tried twice to redirect the estate through his attorneys, that he had documented it, and that he had specifically updated his final wishes to ensure I would be protected from exactly what was happening in this kitchen, right now, on a Sunday morning. I said that Patricia had those documents. I said the conversation was over. I took my coffee and walked to the living room window that overlooked the bay. Behind me, I heard my father push back from the island. I heard my mother say something low and urgent. I heard Sloane's stool scrape against the floor. And then, before anyone could say anything else, Sloane appeared beside me at the window. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, barely above a whisper, "Avalon, there's something they haven't told you." I turned and looked at my sister, really looked at her, at the way her hands were shaking, at the red rim around her eyes that I'd assumed was her usual Sunday morning look, but was suddenly, obviously, something else entirely. Whatever she said next, I was not ready for it, and neither are you. She started to speak, and in the space of 40 seconds, my sister told me something that made the $14 million trust feel like the smallest problem in the room. My parents appeared in the doorway behind her. My father's face had gone the color of old paper. My mother reached out and grabbed Sloane's arm, not gently, and said her name in a voice I had never heard her use before. A warning. A threat wrapped in a mother's mouth. Sloane stopped talking. She looked at me with those red-rimmed eyes, and the thing she'd started to say hung in the air between us, half-finished, already too late to take back, already enough to change everything. I held her gaze. I pressed my hand briefly over hers, and I thought, I need to know all of it. Every last word. Because in a house full of secrets, I'd only just found the first one. I gave my parents 4 days. 4 days of silence and Sunday dinners, and my mother pretending nothing had cracked open in the kitchen. 4 days of my father taking business calls in his office, with the door shut all the way. 4 days of Sloane moving through the house like a ghost who'd said too much and didn't know how to unsay it. I used every one of those days like a woman with a plan, because that's exactly what I was. What Sloane had started to tell me before my mother grabbed her arm was this: my father had a second family. Not a girlfriend, not a situationship, a family. A woman named Britta, who lived in a townhouse in Hayes Valley that my father had been paying for from my mother's family money, not his own accounts, for the past 6 years. A woman who had a daughter. A 5-year-old girl named Nora, who had Randall Prescott's eyes. My mother knew. She had known for 3 years. And the co-trust agreement wasn't just about greed, it was about survival. Because Britta was about to start asking for more. I found this out not from Sloane, who'd been effectively silenced by my mother's iron grip and 17 years of training in family loyalty. I found it out from the one person who knew everything about everyone in my parents' world, and had never once been considered a threat. Our housekeeper, Valentina Cruz, who'd worked for my family for 14 years, and who had never, not once, been asked to sign an NDA. I invited Valentina for coffee on a Tuesday morning, while both my parents were out. I told her what I knew. I told her I was 18 and my grandfather had left me the tools to protect myself, and that no one in that house was going to use me as a financial cushion for their private disasters. Valentina looked at me for a long moment over her mug. Then she nodded once and started talking. She told me about the envelope she'd seen on my father's desk 2 years ago from a family law attorney in Hayes Valley, a firm that specialized in paternity and support agreements. She told me about the afternoon 3 years ago when my mother had locked herself in the master bathroom for 4 hours and Valentina had heard sounds through the door she still prayed about. She told me about the phone number saved in my father's second cell phone, the prepaid one he kept in his car, under the contact name Britt B, which Valentina had seen once while clearing out the back seat. I thanked Valentina. I told her she'd done nothing wrong. I put $5,000 from my own savings account money I'd earned tutoring and nothing to do with the Voss Trust in an envelope and left it on her kitchen counter with a note. That said, for your nephew's school fees, no strings. Then I got to work. And when I say I got to work, I mean I became a different kind of daughter, the kind who doesn't forgive stupidity dressed up as parental love. The private investigator I hired was a woman named Carmen Shi, who worked out of a second-floor office in Soma and had a wall of framed commendations from the DAS office. She was 41, precise, and entirely unimpressed by old money. I explained the situation in 15 minutes. She said she'd need 2 weeks and a retainer. I wrote the check from my personal account. While Carmen worked, I kept playing my role. I ate dinner with my family. I asked my mother about her board meetings. I helped Sloan with her AP history paper. I let my father ruffle my hair in that affectionate way he had, the way that used to make me feel so anchored, and that now made my stomach turn over like a cold engine. Carmen called me on a Thursday evening. She had everything. Everything. And I mean, that in the way that makes people's lives fall apart at the foundation. Randall Prescott had been maintaining a second household for 6.5 years. The townhouse in Hayes Valley was purchased through a shell LLC that ran through one of his venture capital firms. Subsidiary accounts, which meant he had been effectively embezzling from his own company to fund another life. Britta Halloran was 34, a former event planner, and had been told by Randall for years that he was in the process of divorcing my mother. She wasn't a villain. She was a woman who'd been lied to by the same man who'd lied to all of us. Their daughter Nora had Randall's blood type, his jaw, and his collection of allergies. But here is the part that broke me open. The reason my parents had moved so fast on the co-trust agreement wasn't just greed, it was desperation. Britta had recently hired her own attorney to formalize a support arrangement. That attorney had sent a demand letter to my father's personal email. My mother, who had known about Britta in a general sense for 3 years, had chosen to look away. I said the conversation was over. I took my coffee and walked to the living room window that overlooked the bay. Behind me, I heard my father push back from the island. I heard my mother say something low and urgent. I heard Sloane's stool scrape against the floor. And then, before anyone could say anything else, Sloane appeared beside me at the window. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, because the alternative was divorce and the loss of the life she'd built, had recently seen the demand letter. And for the first time, the second family had a dollar amount attached to it. My parents needed my inheritance to stay liquid so they could funnel money through the trust. Accounts to cover both a settlement with Britta and the legal costs of keeping it quiet. The 40% management fee buried on page 11 of that co-trust document wasn't just theft, it was hush money architecture. They were going to use my dead grandparents' legacy to pay for my father's affair and my mother's silence. And they'd almost pulled it off. I sat with that for 2 days. On the 3rd day, I called a meeting. I told my parents it was a family dinner Sloan too, and I cooked it myself, which was notable enough that my mother made a comment about it. I made the pasta carbonara that Pop Roland had taught me with real guanciale and no shortcuts, the way he'd insisted. I set the table properly, I lit the candles, I let the meal happen. After dinner, when Sloane started to rise to clear the plates, I asked her to stay seated. Then I placed a manila folder in the center of the table. My father looked at it. His hand tightened around his wine glass. I said, very calmly, I know about Britta. I know about Nora. I know about the Shell LLC, the subsidiary accounts, and the demand letter. Carmen Shi documented all of it, and Patricia Okafor has the complete file. What happens next is up to you. The candles kept burning. Nobody said a single word for almost a full minute. My mother pressed both hands flat on the table. She looked at my father with an expression that had nothing left in it. No love, no calculation, just exhausted fury. Sloane had gone completely still beside me, and I reached under the table and found her hand and held it. Because she was shaking and she was 16 and none of this was her fault. My father tried. 3 different tones in about 90 seconds. First, he tried authority. Avalon, you have no idea what you're talking about. Then he tried warmth, sweetheart. This is complicated. Let me explain. Then, when neither of those landed, he tried something colder and more honest. What do you want? I told him I wanted 3 things. 1. Randall would establish a proper, documented, legally binding support structure for Nora Halloran. Not through any account connected to the Voss Trust or my mother's family money, but through his own firm, his own earnings, transparent and on record. Nora was 5 years old and completely innocent, and she deserved better than being a secret. 2. My parents would begin divorce proceedings within 60 days, and the terms would be negotiated fairly, without anyone touching my trust. 3. My mother would immediately and permanently resign any claim or interest in the Voss estate. In writing, filed with Patricia Okafor. In exchange for those 3 things, Carmen Shea's file would stay sealed. The Shell LLC would be quietly dissolved. And I would never speak publicly about any of it. My father asked what would happen if he declined. I said Patricia had already prepared a referral package for the California Department of Business, oversight regarding the subsidiary account irregularities, and that the firm's board of directors would receive it by Friday at 9 a.m. He declined exactly nothing. My mother signed the estate waiver 3 days later. She cried while she did it, not the practiced, polished tears of the party circuit, but something raw and older. And I didn't look away from her because she deserved to be witnessed in that moment. I didn't hate her. I pitied her, and I was furious at her. And somewhere underneath all of it, I still loved her the way you love something that hurt you before you understood what pain was. But love was not going to be a reason to let her take what wasn't hers. Some lessons you learned from your grandparents. Some you learn the morning after your birthday. And some you learn by watching the people who raised you become strangers across a candlelit dinner table. Randall. Prescott moved out in November. He took his VC accolades and his second cell phone and the particular brand of charm that had worked on everyone for 25 years. And he moved into a rental in Noah Valley while the divorce proceedings got underway. I heard through Sloan, who'd started therapy and was doing better, genuinely better, that he'd finally had an honest conversation with Britta, that Nora was being properly provided for. I don't know what I felt about that exactly. Something complicated and quiet that I'm still sorting through. My mother sold the Pacific Heights house in February. It went for $9.2 million to a tech founder from Austin. And she used her portion to buy a smaller place in Marin and start over at 51 in whatever way a woman rebuilds herself. When the architecture of her life turns out to have been load-bearing lies. We talked on the phone sometimes. It wasn't warm, not yet, maybe not ever, but it was honest in a way our conversations had never been before. And I decided that was worth something. Sloan came to live with me. That was the part nobody expected, including me. But when the dust settled and my parents were mid-divorce and the Pacific Heights house was being staged for sale, Sloan looked at me across a coffee shop table in the Castro and said she didn't want to live with either of them. She was 16. She was sharp and complicated and had spent her whole life learning to be strategic because strategy was the only language our household spoke, and she was also underneath all of that. Just a kid who wanted someone to tell her the truth for once. I leased a 2-bedroom apartment in Nob Hill. It had old wood floors and a bay window that looked out over the city in a way that reminded me of nothing from my childhood, which felt correct. Sloan enrolled in a new school. I enrolled in Stanford early December. Pop Roland's college fund, the one my parents hadn't known existed, and commuted by train 3 days a week. Patricia Okafor helped me establish a proper investment structure for the Voss Trust. Over 7 years, those $14 million were going to become something larger and steadier, and I intended to honor what Pop Roland had meant when he built it. Patience over performance, Roots over flowers. I thought about him a lot in those months. I thought about the way he'd held my hand at every Thanksgiving and said the same thing: money is patient. People aren't. He'd known, I think. Maybe not the specifics. Maybe not Brita or the Shell LLC or the Sunday morning performance at the Kitchen Island, but he'd known the shape of it. He'd known that the people who loved him or said they did were already doing math in the margins of their affection. And so he'd spent the last years of his life making sure that when it happened, I would have what I needed. Not just the money, the knowledge, the timing. Patricia's number saved in my phone, his voice in my ear every time I felt like cracking. The quiet girl in the corner watches. The quiet girl in the corner remembers. And when the moment comes, the quiet girl acts. There's something I want to say about revenge, because I know that's what people call what I did, and I want to be clear about the distinction that lives in my chest when I think about it. I didn't destroy my father. I could have the board referral alone, would have ended his firm, triggered SEC interest, and made his name unsayable in Silicon Valley for a decade. I didn't destroy my mother, even though she looked the other way on a lie that affected all of us, including a 5-year-old girl in Hayes Valley who deserved better from every adult in her orbit. I didn't even tell their story publicly, didn't post a thread, didn't call a journalist, didn't do any of the loud, triumphant things. That might have felt satisfying for 15 minutes. What I did was simpler and, they think, more permanent. I removed myself as a resource. I stopped being the thing they were building their safety nets from. I made it impossible to use me financially, emotionally, legally, and in doing so, I forced everyone in that household to finally deal with the actual consequences of the actual choices they had actually made. That's not revenge. That's accountability with beautiful execution. Pop Roland would have called it patience. I just call it surviving. On a Tuesday evening in late March, I was sitting at my bay window in Nob Hill doing reading for a sociology seminar when Sloane came and sat on the floor beside my chair with a bowl of cereal. She ate cereal at all hours, a habit I'd stopped trying to fit, and she asked me out of nowhere if I was okay. Not the reflexive kind of okay checking that families do to seem functional, the real kind, the kind where you actually want to know. I thought about it for a moment. I said, yeah. Actually, yeah. She nodded, ate a spoonful of cereal, looked out the bay window at the city lights scattered across the dark like thrown coin. Then she said, I should have told you sooner. About Dad. I'm sorry. I put my hand on the top of her head the way Pop Roland used to do with me. Light and certain, like a benediction. I said she had nothing to be sorry for. She'd been a kid, caught in something that wasn't her design. And when it mattered, she'd tried to warn me. That was enough. That was actually everything. Outside. San Francisco glittered the way it always did, indifferent and gorgeous, and completely unbothered by the private disasters of wealthy families in glass houses, and I sat there in my own apartment, in my own name, with my sister on the floor beside me, and my grandparents' trust compounding quietly in an account that no one could touch. And I thought about who I had been 12 months ago, that quiet girl on the staircase, shoes off, listening to her father's voice through a cracked door, and who I was now. The house was glass, but I was not. I was the one thing my family, in all their scheming and all their beautiful performance, had completely failed to account for. I was the woman who had been watching from the corner the whole time, and I had never, not once, forgotten a single thing I saw. The Voss Trust currently holds $17.3 million. Nora Halloran turned 6 this spring. Sloane Prescott got a 4.1 GPA her first semester at her new school. Patricia Okafor sent me a card on the anniversary of Pop Roland's death. It said, he knew exactly what he was doing. I have it on my refrigerator. I read it every.
Take a moment to comment your city or country. I love connecting with you all. Thank you for listening and supporting, and be sure to subscribe for more stories. More are coming your way soon. Until next time, stay kind to yourself and stay strong.